Dr. Seema, are you there?
Yes, yes. Finally, I am here.
Okay, great. So thanks a lot. And we are all set, so we will get started. All right, so first of all, a very good morning to all of you, and welcome to Life Science Sector Skill Development Council webinar series. And my apologies for slight delay in starting because of a little technical issue, but I'm glad that it's on, and then we have our distinguished speaker with us, Dr. Seema, also. So, friends, this is a webinar series which we have started since last few months, and as all of you are aware that we started with drug discovery and development, then we moved on to impurity profiling, characterization, IPR, and then last month we had a complete webinar on CMC area and the role of CMC and technology transfer from lab to commercial scale. So now this month theme was around biotechnology. So for the benefit of the students and the faculty members, we thought that let's jump into now biotechnology area. And today's topic is going to be on vaccines, which is the most recent thing which is going on because of COVID, as all of you also know. So we thought it would be very interesting to have an eminent speaker, expert from industry to come and talk about it. So before I start, for all the new joinees, would like to just very quickly talk about what is council. So LSSDC, as all of you know, is a not-for-profit, non-statutory certification body under the mandate of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. And the major objective of this is to fill the gap between industry requirement and academia. So basically, we try to create an ecosystem where industry-ready candidates can be made available. So that's one of the major objectives of this council. It comes under Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. What comes within the purview of this Life Science Council is entire pharmaceuticals. So within pharmaceutical, all the domestic formulation companies, export-oriented formulation companies, API manufacturers, contract manufacturing of formulations and nutraceuticals. And within biopharmaceutics, again, companies who are into research and manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, they also come within the purview of this. And then contract research, which includes both in terms of preclinical as well as clinical research organizations. So all this industry comes within the purview of life science sector. And then that's where we try to encourage skill development as much as possible. So friends, all of you know India is third largest pharmaceutical industry in the world by volume. And when I say third largest, means it includes medicine as well as vaccines. Okay. And today's vaccine topic, actually, before I introduce the speaker, just wanted to keep this into perspective that this development of vaccines, to protect against viral disease, it's one of the hallmarks of the modern medicine, right? So all of you would have studied in your biotechnology, this vaccine development started way back in 1796 by Edward Jenner, when he actually observed that the milkmaids who contracted the cowpox, they were they were seen to be resistant to smallpox because both the virus strains are similar, close to each other. So he came with this hypothesis that if the same cowpox virus can be injected into human, then probably they will be having immunity for both the viruses. And today is a scenario when we have completely eradicated smallpox from the world. So that's where vaccine thing started way back in 1700. And if I cut short to current scenario of COVID, so all of you know that even if you talk of repurposed drugs or any specific treatment, unfortunately, we don't have anything for specifically for the treatment of COVID. So the only thing now where the whole world is eyeing and the only weapon we have to combat this disease is vaccine, right? And all of you are aware, like Pfizer and Moderna Therapeutics, and in India, Covishield from Serum Institute in collaboration with AstraZeneca, and Oxford Institute in Bharat Biotech, Covaxin. So these are the vaccines which have come up, okay? And even J&J, they've started their clinical trials in pediatric clinical trials. So very soon we'll have the vaccine for young ones also for COVID-19. And if we talk of future, so actually producing a usable, safe antiviral vaccine, basically once today's lecture you attend, you will learn that it involves a lot of steps and still there is a lot, huge scope to go forward from here. And with this genetic vaccines research and new discovery, it looks like now the golden age of vaccine have actually started. Although since childhood, at least up to the age of 10 years, we all are taking vaccines. But now with this new genetic vaccine scope, I think the golden era of vaccine has now started. So futuristic, if we talk, then I'm sure like vaccines like rabies and all, which are not satisfactory for the mass immunization. So they're used for case-to-case basis. Maybe we'll have some breakthrough in that. And one of the important, again, RNA virus induced disease like HIV, where we still don't have any vaccine. Hopefully now it looks like in time to come, we'll have some breakthrough in that as well. So with that brief introduction, I think without taking further time, let me introduce our distinguished speaker from industry, Dr. Seema Sharma. She is Vice President with Cadila Pharmaceutical Limited in biotechnology. She has a bachelor's and master's in biochemistry, and she attained her PhD again in biochemistry from SP University Anand. So her research, basically, she has done a lot of research in terms of glycosylation during her PhD. Basically, her disease target which she worked on was on diabetes. After doing her PhD research, she got into teaching. So she has a lot of experience in teaching also as one of the faculty members with the SP University in Biotechnology Department. And then back in 2000, she came into industry. And since then, more than 2 decades of experience she has in biotechnology. She's currently responsible for process development and manufacturing of biosimilars and biotherapeutics and vaccines with Cadila Pharmaceutical Limited. She has very rich experience of technology transfers from R&D, process development and scale up of technologies to commercialization of the products. And she has successfully transferred the technologies for a number of biological products like streptokinase, filgrastim, erythropoietin, and VLP-based vaccines for influenza and rabies from proof of concept to the manufacturing. So she has worked very closely with the government institutes also for the technology transfer, and with lots of experience with her over 2 decades for biologics alone. I think we are so very honored to have Dr. Seema with us today. And I'm sure all the students, the faculty members, will have a lot to learn from today's very insightful lecture from Dr. Seema Sharma. So without further ado, let me just request Dr. Seema to take over. Over to you, Dr. Seema. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. Good morning, everybody. And thanks for joining this session. So as mentioned by Deepak, today the world is passing through a pandemic situation. We all are aware of the pandemic situation that we are passing through. And the need today is the vaccine. It is known that it is the only vaccine against COVID-19 which can bring us out of this present scenario. So this respiratory illness is caused because of the coronavirus, and this coronavirus is because of coronavirus, there is a respiratory illness because of which we have also seen a number of fatalities. So I think I will have to share my presentation, Deepak.
Yes, yes. So now you are the host. You can share your presentation and then you can start.
Okay. Yeah, can you see this now?
Yes, if you can just make it full screen, just double click on that, it will become full screen, then it will be...
Full screen.
Yeah, and if you see just below your presentation, the 4th option, if you click that, it will become full screen now. Yeah, the next to that one, yeah.
Now?
Just, no, I think you'll have to go back to the, yeah, if you click those three dots there.
No.
Yeah, hide presenter view. You can just make hide presenter view. Just click on that. Yeah, the last one. No, not there. The last, yeah. You have to click there, hide presenter view. And now go to the first slide, yeah.
I cannot see the presentation now.
Yes, this is fine, perfectly fine now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so since we are into a phase of pandemic where COVID-19 vaccine is the only thing which can bring us out of this situation, I thought of let us discuss about the emerging concepts and technologies for vaccine development. So what are the different technologies? How are the vaccines produced? How are these vaccines, different technologies differ from each other? How are these vaccine manufacturers face different challenges to produce the vaccines? So keeping all that in mind, I have made a presentation wherein you can see this is the content of my presentation where we will talk about different technologies. What are the challenges of vaccine development? What are the advantages and disadvantages of different technologies of vaccine manufacturing? I will emphasize more on the virus-like particle and the nanoparticle technology. These are the latest current technologies being used for the vaccine development. I will also talk something about the pandemic preparedness, that how should be our pandemic preparedness and the role of single-use manufacturing in the pandemic preparedness. We will also see the regulatory pathway for vaccine licensure. You see on this slide, I have listed out various vaccine technologies. The traditional vaccine technology was to inactivate or kill the pathogen itself. So either killing or inactivating the pathogen or live attenuated vaccine. So live attenuated vaccine and the inactivated vaccines are the first generation vaccines. So in these type of vaccines, the pathogens, whole of the pathogen or the organism which is responsible to cause the disease is used as a part of vaccine. So I will talk about this in details in my upcoming slides. Second is the emerging vaccine technologies. So what is the second generation vaccines? These are the virus vector vaccines and the subunit vaccines, wherein either a part like the protein or a polysaccharide or a capsid of the pathogen is used to produce a vaccine, or a virus is used as a vector to produce the vaccine against a particular pathogen. Then the third generation vaccines are the DNA mRNA vaccines. And the new technologies are the virus-like particle and the nanoparticle vaccine technologies. So whichever method you use for making a vaccine, the vaccine should be safe, it should be stable, and it should be able to elicit adequate immune response with the minimum number of doses. So that all this has to be achieved when you are producing a vaccine. So what are the challenges that a vaccine developer, if a manufacturer is going to produce a vaccine, what are the different challenges that he faces? So first thing is developing or designing a vaccine for a population with compromised immunity is very difficult, because the people who are already having low immunity, to develop or to boost up the immunity against a particular pathogen is challenging. Certain population is already having a medical condition, like the pre-existing medical conditions. If they are cancer patients on oncology treatment, then also their immunity is down, and because of which the vaccine that you are using may not have an impact on this kind of population. So that is one challenge. Another very important is the transition from laboratory to the clinical trials. You know, you can develop a vaccine in a lab, you can develop the product in a lab, but it has to be taken up to the clinical stage. And going to the clinical stage, the process that you have developed has to be very, very consistent. The formulation that you have developed should have a stable product. It should have robust analytical and clinical assays in place, because the product that you have produced or the vaccine that you have produced should be analyzed in such a way that it gives the quantity of the product which you are going to inject should be properly analyzed. And secondly, the clinical assay, like once the vaccine is injected to a person or to an individual, what is the immune response? So what kind of immune response is generated? So we should have assays in place to study the immune response that is generated. Then one more thing is that whatever kind of vaccine you produce, it is a biological entity, because either you take a whole pathogen or you take a part of that pathogen, but it would be a biological entity. So it would be either a virus or a bacteria or a component of it. But these are highly variable, and because of this variability, your product may also vary. But a vaccine, since you're going to use it as a vaccine, it cannot be varying in its final product form. So it should have pre-specified specifications. It should clear all those specifications. It should be highly pure, and the product should be commercially viable because it should have the yields to give the product to the mass populations. Another challenge is the lack of approved adjuvants. Presently, very few adjuvants are approved and they are being used in the delivery systems. So a lot of research is required to produce new vaccines and use them as the delivery systems, because adjuvants will boost up the immunity. Next is the immunization. So we should understand the immune response that I have already told, that the immune response should be quantitatively as well as qualitatively studied. Like we know that I have given a vaccine to an individual, the individual will have the antibody response against it or the immune response against it. But whether that antibody that is produced is functional or not, it is the quantity that we measure. But we should also be able to see whether it is protective antibody. So for that, we should have neutralization assays in place. So whether that antibody or the immunity that has developed is able to neutralize the pathogen or not, that is very essential. So we should have optimized clinical assays. Then not only the antibody production, it will also give the cell-mediated immunity. So we should have assays to study the cell-mediated immunities also. And last but not the least, all the vaccines are used for target populations are healthy individuals. So when healthy individuals are being studied, the safety profile is essentially very, very essential to be studied, because you are going to you are going to use these vaccines on healthy individuals. So they should be very safe. So before getting the license or before the pre-licensure, you should have the clinical trials done with several thousands of subjects, and safety must also be, continuously, it should be monitored post licensure for detection of any uncommon adverse event. So that may happen that these people may develop some adverse effects even after the licensure of a vaccine. Once it is into the market, the post-marketing surveillance studies should be carried out. Now let us see one by one what are the vaccine technologies, or what are the different types of vaccines. So conventional vaccines. The conventional vaccines, which are the first generation vaccines, use entire pathogen or the organism. Now this organism can be inactivated so that it produces the immunity, but it is not antigenic anymore. So inactivation process of the pathogen or the organism takes place by different methods. It can be heat inactivated, it can be chemically inactivated, it can be inactivated by using radiations. So you have to inactivate the whole organism so that when it is, and use it as a vaccine, so that when it is used as a vaccine, it will generate the immune response. The body will feel that there is a foreign body and or the pathogen, and it will start producing the immune response against it. But since you have inactivated that pathogen, it will be no more antigenic. So these are the inactivating procedures. Another type of the conventional vaccine is live attenuated vaccine. Now what is this live attenuated vaccine? Here the vaccines are produced using the pathogens, but the pathogens are weakened for its virulence. The pathogen will not be virulent, though it will be live, but it will not be virulent. And how do you achieve that? So for doing that, these are either grown in, the pathogen is either grown in a different species. So the culture medium and the species that is used to grow this virus or the bacterium or any other organism is different than its actual species. So its virulence will go down. Secondly, you can also keep on giving passages. Like if you have a virus, if you keep giving passages to that virus, it will start losing its virulence. So such kind of pathogens can also be used as a attenuated vaccines. So inactivated vaccines are polio vaccine, tetanus vaccine, diphtheria, and measles. These are all inactivated vaccines have been produced by conventional using the conventional methods. Now, these type of vaccines may not be suitable or even feasible in the outbreak situations like COVID. So the present situation, as we have discussed, is wherein coronavirus is already infecting the people, and we do not, in the pandemic situations or outbreak situations, we do not have so much of time to characterize the organism completely, because we have to produce the vaccine at the earliest. So using the live attenuated vaccine technology for production of vaccines, which has a risk of reversion because you haven't studied the organism completely. So if it reverses back and it goes back to its virulent form, then it is very dangerous. So such kind of technologies are not advisable to be used in these conditions. Inactivation may not, there is an example which I would like to give here is for Ebola virus. So against Ebola virus, inactivation process was used to produce the vaccine, but it was not protective. Then another example is the RSV. So for RSV, attenuation process, inactivation process was done by using formalin. And even after inactivating the RSV, when it was taken into the clinical trials, it had reverted back into its wild type and it started infecting the population. So these are the limitations of using the conventional methods. And one more thing is that when you are using a pathogen, you have to grow that pathogen in large quantities, because pandemic situations will need mass vaccination. Mass vaccinations means you have to produce a lot of vaccine, a number of thousands and thousands of vaccines in a particular facility. So you should have big facility to manufacture this, because you will need biosafety levels, high level of biosafety containments, because you are going to use the pathogens and you are going to grow these pathogens, and that too in large quantities. So that also is one of the limitations. So the approach should be such that you have a procedure, you have a technology wherein the pathogen cultivation is limited, or you try to restrict the pathogen cultivation and try to use other technologies of vaccine production in such situations. So this is the second generation vaccines, like the vector vaccines. So what are the vector vaccines? These are actually the viruses which are developed as vaccines, as vectors for the vaccine development. The viruses like adenoviruses, herpes virus, retroviruses, flaviviruses are developed for using as a vector to produce the vaccine. Now here I will give you an example of adenovirus and HEK cells. Sputnik V, which is being produced by against coronavirus, which is presently being produced by Russian authorities, it uses the adenovirus and the HEK cells. So what is done in this? Even the AstraZeneca is the adenovirus based vaccine. So what is done here? The replication defective adenovirus is produced. The gene responsible for the adenovirus replication is removed, and the spike protein, spike S protein, which is the antigenic protein of coronavirus, the gene for that is inserted into the adenovirus, and this adenovirus, which is replication defective adenovirus that is produced, it infects the HEK cells, and in large quantities you get this virus. So this virus, which is having, it has these spike protein genes, and these spike protein genes through this vector or through this adenovirus are inserted into the human cells. So it starts producing the spike proteins. The human cells will start producing the spike proteins, and it will have an immunogenicity against these spike proteins. Now, how you have provided this proteins to the human cells is through the adenovirus. So adenovirus is used, and such other viruses are used as vectors. So they are being used as vectors. And so this type of technology is known as viral vector vaccine technology. So the body will start producing the T cells as well as the B cell antibody response, because it will mimic a virus. It is not actually the infecting virus, but it will mimic the infecting virus, and the body will start producing the immune response against it. Next is the subunit vaccines. Subunit vaccines deliver the antigens as purified proteins or other components of the organisms, like not only the proteins, it can have the part of the pathogen, like it will have a protein or a sugar or a toxoid or a capsid, which is being used as a vaccine. So the advantage here is that it is very safe and it is scalable also. Here you are not using the whole pathogen, so you need not go for any biosafety containments, and you can produce such kind of vaccines, the subunit vaccines, in large quantities, and are also very safe because pathogens are not used here. So they have an ability to express and purify any particular antigen of interest in large quantities. But now what is lacking here, or what is the limitation of these kind of vaccines, is that they need adjuvants, because if it is a protein, it is a particle, it is a small particle, it needs adjuvants for it eliciting the response, the immune response. And also it will need the booster doses or the repeated doses. So booster shots to get ongoing protection against the diseases. These are the limitations. So further, to get increased immunogenicity and stability of subunit vaccines, further research was done, and virus-like particle vaccines and the nanoparticle vaccine technology came up. Now I will emphasize more on the virus-like particle and the nanoparticle technologies, which are the latest or the emerging trends in vaccine development. Before we go on to that, let us see the DNA and mRNA vaccines. Presently, mRNA vaccines are also being produced against coronavirus. So here the vaccine contains what? It contains either the mRNA or the DNA, and it is injected into the human cells. So these vaccines are injected into the body and taken up by the cells, whose normal metabolic processes will be used for the protein production. So what will happen if you are injecting a DNA? It will transcribe into the mRNA, and then from that it will translate to produce the protein. So it can be a vaccine against a particular protein. So if the epitope or the antigen of an organism is a protein, then this is very useful. This technology is very, very useful. But if your epitope or antigenic epitope is not a protein, you cannot use this technology, because if it is a polysaccharide, then the DNA and RNA will not have an impact on the immune system. So mRNA vaccines are the mRNA for specific antigen epitope, which are injected into the cells, and it produces the harmless piece of what is called the antigenic protein, and it elicits the immune response. mRNA never enters the nucleus of the cells, and the cells break down, and it gets rid of the mRNA using the instructions and start producing the immune responses. So it is very easy to produce, because you have to either produce the DNA or you have to produce the mRNA. It is cost effective. It has no storage or shipping problems. It has long-term stability also, and no need for any recombinant protein production or expression or purification or any use of the adjuvants. So in spite of these several advantages of DNA and RNA vaccines, such as minimum risk of infection and ability to reproduce, there is a limited use of these vaccines, because the risk of affecting genes that are controlling the cell growth. So these DNAs or the RNA may have an impact on the cell growth genes. So it will have an impact on those genes and affect those genes. Then there is also a possibility of inducing the antibody production against the DNA. The DNA that you have used, if the antibodies are produced against that DNA, it will get a premature degradation. It will degrade that DNA if the antibodies are produced, and it will nullify the effect of the DNA further. Then there is a possibility of tolerance against this antigen, and challenges are associated with the efficient delivery of these vaccine molecules to the target sites, because it has been seen that when you are using a DNA as a vaccine, it gets accumulated at one position, at one place, and it is localized at that stage itself, and it is not reaching the required area. So efficient delivery systems are required when you are developing a DNA vaccine. Let us see the VLP vaccine technology. Now, what is VLP? It is virus-like particle vaccines. Now, these are actually not the viruses. Here, I will give you an example of influenza vaccine. So, the virus has three different proteins which are antigenic, the HA, NA, and M1. So, what happens is in this technology, we form a virus structure which is similar to a virus. It mimics the structure of a virus by assembling these proteins. So what you have to do, you have to only produce the HA, NA, and M1. You have to express these proteins in an expression system, purify those proteins, and these proteins will reassemble to form a structure which will mimic the virus. And once that is injected into your body, the body will think that this is a virus, and it will start producing the antibodies and the immune response against that HA, NA, and M1. And the HA is the main antigenic protein over here. So you have to be careful when you are selecting the protein. The protein should be the epitope protein of the antigen. So antigen epitope protein should be selected for making this type of vaccines. So VLP vaccines can be produced in eukaryotic or the prokaryotic systems. Alternatively, we can also form a VLP vaccine blank template, like say from the HA, NA, and M1 of influenza, if I have formed a template. So what is this? It is a structure, and then chemically I can link the antigen peptide of another pathogen. Say this structure can be used to carry the peptide of another antigen, and that can again be used as a vaccine. So because these VLPs do not contain a viral genome at all, they are very safe. They are scalable to high levels. It can be scaled up. It is just a recombinant protein expression, and they fully activate the immune systems, and they are taken up by the dendritic cells where they are processed and presented as the MHC class 1 and 2 and activate the adaptive immune responses. Subsequent stimulation of the CD8 and CD4, so this is the cell-mediated immunity, is also produced using the VLP vaccines. So they are considered as highly immunogenic, and they can stimulate the robust cellular and humoral immunity. So number of VLP vaccines are now available, like the hepatitis B vaccine, human papilloma, that is the papilloma virus, that is HPV vaccine, influenza vaccine, and RSV vaccine. Now further, the efforts to further increase the immunogenicity of VLP vaccines, including optimizing antigen design, is being planned. Scalable processes with high expression of proteins. Now this is a cartoon where we can see how the VLP formation takes place. Here the example that I have given you was the influenza. You can see this is the HA and NA protein, the surface proteins, and this is the empty shell that is formed using this HA and NA proteins and the M1 proteins. So this empty shell will not have the genetic material, but it mimics the virus. This whole structure looks like a virus. So how this is produced? There is one expression platform, which I will give you as an example over here. The genes are cloned into the baculovirus. The baculovirus will have the genes of HA, NA, and M1. And baculovirus infects only the SF9 cells or the insect cells. It doesn't infect the human cells. So baculovirus is having the genes of these proteins, which infects the SF9 cells. SF9 cells are grown to produce these proteins. And once these proteins are produced, they reassemble to form a structure like a virus. And this is then used as a vaccine. So even the second thing that you use as a VLP, as a template, blank VLP template, because it doesn't have any genetic material, you can also conjugate over here by chemical cross-linking. You can conjugate another peptide of another pathogen, so that you get a vaccine against this pathogen, for which the antigen you are used. So that way also the VLP technology can be useful. So further, after this VLP technology, the next generation, not the next generation, but still further work has been taken place, and people have produced nanoparticle based vaccines. Now, what are these nanoparticles? Nanoparticle will have only a single peptide or a protein, and it will be used as a vaccine. So here in the virus-like particle, it forms a structure of a virus, whereas even if you have a single protein, only the HA, say instead of HA, NA and M1 to produce a shell, if you purify only the HA protein, then you should have a technology wherein you stabilize that protein in such a way that it forms a structure which looks like a virus. So the technology is to protect the antigens from premature degradation of antigens. It will be encapsulated. So you should provide, here I will give an example in the next slide, and facilitate the antigen uptake and processing by antigen presenting cells. It will be controlled release and targeted delivery, and minimum risk as you are not using any pathogens or there is no genetic material here. So nano delivery systems, novel vaccine strategies for induction of innate as well as adaptive immune responses against the infectious diseases are now developed. So let us see an example of this. Now this is the recombinant protein micelle formation. Now how the nanoparticles are formed. So it is a single protein. See here, this is one protein. What the researchers have done is that they have provided a buffer over here, which allows to form a micelle like a structure. Now, because of this micelle structure, it is only a reassembly of the same protein, but the conditions are such that it forms a micelle. And once this micelle is formed, the size of the structure is increased, and because the size is increased and it has the antigenic protein, only one protein which is antigenic, it is able to elicit the immune response. So it has only single antigen and repeating units of those single antigen, which forms a micelle, and this micelle can be used to inject the cells and form and raise the antibody or the immune response. This is the virus-like particle technology, and this is the nanoparticle technology. So nanoparticle here, you can see here, again, these are the antigens, and we can also use, see, this is the example of micelle which I had given. Instead of micelle, we can also have metal ions, we can have some carriers like lipids or polymers to form a structure of these nanoparticles in such, because structure and conformation of a pathogen is very much responsible for evoking the immune response. So if it is a single protein, it will not be able to give you the immune response. So to get that immune response, you have to bring this protein into a structure of a virus so that it elicits the immune response. So particles are stabilized by using different technologies like micelle formation or carrier linkages to form a structure which elicits the immune response. Again, the same nanoparticle vaccines, this we have already discussed, and there are a number of vaccines which are produced using the nanoparticle technology. We also at Cadila have produced the rabies vaccine, which is nanoparticle subunit vaccine. We have also produced the influenza vaccine, which is a virus-like particle using the virus-like particle technology, and influenza vaccines are also available in the market. Now the pandemic preparedness. Let us see what should be done to have a pandemic preparedness. So first thing is that you should have a platform technology which can be used in such situations what we are facing right now. So if you have a pandemic condition, your technology should be a robust and a technology wherein immediately you can bring the new pathogen and using the same platform start producing the vaccines. So here, as we can see, the VLP based vaccine technology and the nanoparticle based technologies can be produced, the vaccine can be produced if all the regulatory approvals are in place only in 90 days. So here, this is a very good example of influenza H7N9A VLP vaccine. So this was produced in 3 months. The HANA gene sequence was published in March. And once the HANA sequence was published and synthesized in April, then the master virus seeds was prepared from April to May. And once your master virus seed or the virus MVS, what is that MVS? It is the expression system like baculovirus and SF9 system. So baculovirus is having the genes of your HANA. So that is the MVS. That master virus stock is used to infect the drug substance, used to infect the SF9 cells and produce the drug substance. So the drug substance, after getting the sequence in April, the drug substance and drug product are ready in May, as well as the QC analysis will start for the master virus that stocks have been produced. They are tested and released, and once these virus stocks are released, you can start the analysis of the product. And doing this, as you can see, by end of June, the first GMP batch is released. So it takes only 3 months if you have an established technology to produce the vaccines, provided you also have the regulatory clearance. So this is an example of H7N9, and there is another example of nanoparticle-based Ebola vaccine. This, after getting a sequence, this vaccine came out into the clinical trials in just 4 months. So gene sequence to cGMP material for human use in 3 to 2 months can be produced if you have an established technology like VLP-based or a nanoparticle-based technology for vaccine production. Now, what is the role of single-use manufacturing process? Single-use manufacturing is very much helpful in pandemic preparedness. So as you can see here, conventional manufacturing process equipments. This is a manufacturing setup using all the conventional process equipments like the mixing tank, bioreactors, media holding tanks, buffer vessels, the ultrafiltration and the microfiltration units, column chromatographies, buffer transfer vessels, and the product holding vessels. These are all all vessels over here are fixed. All the vessels and the equipments are fixed, and the SS piping is there throughout the facility. So it is a fixed facility which was being used as a conventional manufacturing process. Now the disposable systems are available. So you can get a bioreactor in the disposable form. You can also scale it up from a lab scale to mid scale to a commercial scale. It is very cost effective, and the time required to give the product is very less, because the reasons I would give now in the next slide. This is flexibility with respect to product changeovers also. You can immediately change the product. Like if you are producing one product using a facility without doing any CIP or SIP or product changeovers or validations, you can go to the next product. Now, how you can do that? Because flexible manufacturing process equipments are using only the bags. Like if it is a bioreactor, it uses the bags for culturing the cells. So these are all disposable bags here. Once your batch is over or one product is produced, you just have to remove this bag and dispose it off, and put another bag over here and start the new process or the new batch or the new product also. Why new product? Because product changeover will not take time, because whatever equipments you are using here are all having the disposable bags in that. So you have removed all the bags, like the media mixing tank, this will have the liners, the bioreactors will have the disposable bags, even the microfiltration and ultrafiltration units that you are using for the downstream processing will have the disposable membranes. So once these are used, they are removed and a new set of bags comes into place. So you can take a next batch of the same product, and also you can change the product and go to the next kind of a vaccine or a product if it is required. So these things are very helpful in the conditions like pandemic or the situations where the outbreak scenarios are there, where you have to be portable. That is, your process should be portable. It should be able to go from one lab to another manufacturing unit, from lab to another manufacturing unit. That is portable. And secondly, it should be flexible. Flexible means like if you are using the disposable systems, this will be very helpful. You can remove and go to the next product, and you can start producing thousands and millions of doses of the vaccine. So again, these are the single-use manufacturing, flexible and equipments, easily scalable to the changing needs. Here you can see this is a column where all the column is a pre-packed column. So just you have to use it and remove it and bring next product, bring next column when you are using next product and produce the vaccine. So it increases the speed of facility of licensure also, because initial, when you are making a facility, at that time also the validations are least in these cases, because you are not using any product contact material which is reused. So no cleaning in place or sterilization in place in the infrastructure is required, and no associated validation requirements. It increases the use of controlled and non-classified space, because you are not using any, you are using the materials like the bags. So you need not have classified areas also in the simple areas, because you will be having sterile aseptic connections. When you are transferring from one bag to another bag, you need not have controlled classified areas also for manufacturing. So these are very helpful in the outbreak scenarios like present situation that we are facing. The size and capacities, so the bioreactors are available in all range of the bioreactors are available right from 5 liter to 2000 liter scales. You have the downstream processing up to 2000 liter scales, like the disposable depth filters, disposable centrifuges, ultrafiltration systems, all are available in the disposable forms. And more recently, disposable production purification technology has also come up, where the pre-packed columns are available. And then you are also using for the buffer preparations, the liners are there. Only you have to have the tanks, and the same tanks can be used without cleaning or sterilization for the next product. Now we see the economics and facility cost. Say this is a traditional fixed manufacturing facility. So capital investment is high, long setup time, significant validation costs will be required, because you have to validate lines over here. There are pipings and lines, and all this needs to be validated, and it is highly localized. Whereas if you are using a disposable system, it reduces the capital investment. It is faster setup and project throughput, and easily movable and flexible. So that we have already discussed how, and it is also, there is an opportunity of stockpiling the capacity. Now the production capacities with disposable systems will save time. Say this is a facility being commissioned and validation of the facility. So build the facility, it is a traditional facility being built up, where building the facility, commissioning the facility, and validating the process and equipments takes 3 to 4 years. Whereas if you have a disposable facility setup, it will be produced only within 2 years. So you are saving 50 to 60% of time here. So instead of 4 years, you can set up a facility in 2 years, and then keep on using this facility for the production of vaccines. And whenever there is an outbreak like the present condition, you can remove everything and start producing the vaccine which is required. What are the economics of manufacturing this cost? So A is the facility. If you see the facility cost, so here we have given comparison of egg-based vaccine manufacturing, traditional cell culture-based vaccine manufacturing, and disposable cell culture-based vaccine manufacturing. So you can see that egg-based manufacturing will need maximum cost will be there. Then the traditional cell culture, and the least in the facility cost would be for the disposable cell culture systems. Material cost, of course, the operating costs here will be high, because you are going to use the cell bags, which will be expensive, whereas here you will be using the same tanks for using your filling your media and the culture. Next is the labor cost. Labor cost will be decreased like anything, because you need not go for the cleanings and sterilizations and huge tanks moving here and there, and so you need not have labor. Depreciation costs, of course, will be less, and utility cost will be very low. So that way, the cost of goods will be reduced by 30 to 40% in these cases. Even the regulatory aspects of single-use manufacturing. So as I have said, this is the fixed facility and this is the flexible facility. So you need not show the cleaning procedures, which requires time and money in the fixed facility, whereas here it is not required. The cleaning validation time depend on product to product, whereas here you do not have any cleaning validations required. Loss in the facility utilization, downtime. Here at least 1 to 2 months, whereas here maximum 1 week. Regulatory hurdles, yes, in the fixed facility, you have to have a lot of, you will have to show a lot of validation studies over here, whereas that is not required here. So cost and time, you are going to save 80 to 90% as well as 70 to 80% time saving. And regulatory clearances will be very fast in such cases. this is a general regulatory pathway for getting a vaccine licensure. So if it is a recombinant protein, whatever we have discussed, apart from the conventional technology, the different technologies are using recombinant manufacturing process. So you have to have institutional biosafety committee approval for the recombinant vaccines. You should have test license form 29 for research and development. Then the process development and proof of concept is to be established. You should have consistency batches with 3 months stability data. Then you should also have review committee genetic material approval, that is RCGM approval for the conduct of PCT, the preclinical studies. You perform the preclinical studies. Again, you get the NOC from RCGM. You have to have the phase 1 clinical trial application approvals for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. And then manufacturing and marketing authorization approval from the CGI. And finally, you get a manufacturing license. So that is all about the vaccine technologies that I could brief. Thank you. Now it is open to you all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Seema, for a very informative and detailed presentation. I'm sure all the students and faculty members would have refreshed, or at least many of them budding students would have learned the whole process of vaccine development. So thank you for such an insightful talk. Now we have a few questions from the participants. So let me just put it across to you, and then we can, so I would request all the participants also that feel free to post your questions in the chat box, and then we'll take those questions one by one, and Dr. Seema would be available to answer those questions. So to start with, the question is from Chandana. How do the vaccine dose is decided to elicit immune response when target population of people with different ages? So how do you actually decide the vaccine dose for different age groups? That is the first question.
Yes. So as I have said that we have to do phase 1 clinical trial. Before going for the phase 1 clinical trials, we have to do the preclinical studies. So first of all, we do a dose study in the animals. And once that is completed, the phase 1 clinical trial will have different age groups, will have different dose strengths, and all the different doses will be used for the phase 1 trials. And once that is done for different ages and different strength of the vaccine, and that is the result of, or the immune response is seen, then only the dose can be decided for different age groups.
Okay. And then
we try to cover as much as possible all the age.
Sure, definitely. So this is basically covered within the scope of a clinical trial when it is done in phase 1 to counteract the different age groups within that. Great. Yes. And then the next question is, how do adjuvants boost immunity? I mean, whether they have any role to play to boost the immunity, the adjuvant used for the vaccines?
Yes. Adjuvants are like modulates. They modulate the immune system. Adjuvants are very, very important in the T cell mediated immunity. So if you can see, the cell mediated immunity comes once you have adjuvants tied up to your protein. So if your protein is adjuvanted, protein or a vaccine or anything pathogen, if it is adjuvanted, it will have the cell mediated immunity just because of the adjuvant that you are using.
Great. Then this one question is from Amit. Drug development process has advanced from generation 1 to 4 up to VLP like vaccine development process. And there will always be new era of challenges along the technology advancements. So what are the present challenges in vaccine development after the global pandemic, and what are the problems specifically concerned to VLP and nano vaccine development?
So that I have the challenges I have already listed as a part of my presentation, that what are the present challenges that we are facing. And even for the virus-like particle, I have said that why we are going to the nanoparticle technology, because virus-like particle will need a number of proteins to be produced, expressed, purified. So it is a cumbersome process. So instead of using a VLP, we have started using now the nanoparticle. But there are of course limitations for each of the technology which keep on, the limitations, we will keep on doing the new research and keep on approving and getting rid of those limitations. Like for the nanoparticle technology, again, as it has been seen, that it can be tied up to metal ion, and it will need some linkers, or it will be a micelle formation to form the to give the immune response. So it has its own limitation, whereas VLP has its own limitation. So we try to overcome as much as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Seema. Then another question is from Manju. How would be this disposable systems being discarded? So like we talked about two systems. So if you use disposable systems, how are they discarded? And can this be used for long term?
No, disposable systems cannot be used for long term. After each batch or once you have used that say bioreactor, you have to dispose it off in a correct manner. And how that is done is you should have SOPs in place for disposing of that reactor or a bag. So you have to add hypochlorite, which is a solution. 4% hypochlorite is always added to get rid of all the viruses or the pathogens that are used in that. And if it is a small bag, it can be autoclaved and then given to the waste management, which is a GPCB approved waste management system.
Great. Then there's a question from Apurva. What can be used from coronavirus as nanoparticle vaccine?
It is the spike protein. It is the spike S protein, because we all know that the spike S protein is the antigen which is responsible for this coronavirus disease. And we should have a nanoparticle of, we can go and produce the spike protein as a nanoparticle.
Then there's a question from Manvi. If VLP versus nanoparticle vaccines, are they safe? I think yes, of course they are safe, but over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, they are very safe because you're not having any genetic material in that. It is only the protein, and the protein is going to elicit the immune response. So it doesn't have any genetic material. It doesn't even have the pathogen. So it is the safest technology.
Absolutely. So before I take up a couple of more questions, there are one or two small questions from my side to Dr. Seema. One is like, as we've seen, this is a long process of vaccine development. I mean, starting from start to finish while it comes in the market. And especially for COVID, we have seen that we have done this entire process. I mean, companies have done this process in less than 6 months of period. So, of course, for a general people, there is a concern about whether the safety has been really studied really well before it is being launched, or there were some corners being cut during the whole process of development. And then for the benefit of the students, if you can also touch base on the emergency authorization use, so that at least they can understand that how these vaccines have really come up so fast. Thank you.
Yeah, so the governments or the regulators will never cut corners when it is safety related things. So these vaccines, all the safety profile or the safety studies have been done when they are produced, before they are produced. The only thing that is not done is a long-term study. Could not do the long-term study because you have to bring the vaccine to the market. So the initially what people have done is producing the vaccine and doing the safety study along with it parallelly. So that all has been done, and emergency approval is while the clinical trials are ongoing, the product is approved into the market. So the only thing is that exploratory studies are not done in such cases, though they are ongoing right now, on exploratory studies, but no cutting the corners by the regulators on safety aspects.
All right. In fact, now we see that there is a specific age group which is being advised to go for the COVID vaccine, probably because whatever initial trial data is generated is in that population. So it's not advisable for the kids actually. So for pediatric vaccine, are the trials same, or there are different protocols? And of course, it has to be different, but that has to undergo an entire different approval process?
No, it's not an approval process, different approval process, but until unless a vaccine has been approved for adults, it cannot be used as even in the trials for the pediatrics. So for the children, for the kids, the dose study has to be first defined, a separate clinical trial has to be done, a pediatric clinical trial, and then only you can bring the product for the children.
All right. Okay, so that was a question from Purva. Then during increased mutation rate of the virus, okay, I think there is any follow-up to that. Apurva, if you are there, if you can just unmute yourself, because I think in the chat box I can see only one sentence from you during increased mutation rate of virus, but the follow-up thing in regards to what you are asking this. So that would be useful if you can just unmute yourself. Okay. Meanwhile, Dr. Seema, we can take just couple of more questions, like what regulatory guidance reference for this expedited process can be referred? So is there any reference document for the expedited process of approval?
Yeah, for COVID-19 vaccine, there is a new guideline. I can send you the details of that guideline if you want. There is a separate guideline for such emergency, and that is only for COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing.
Right. And Dr. Seema, then the follow-up question would be like, now that COVID, it seems like soon we'll be able to control this through the vaccination drives, which are going pan country and in fact globally. But now, do you really think that, what's your take on that now that it is opened up, this virus, how it can impact the human race? Do you really think that going forward now we should be prepared for many such viruses to come and to be able to be so much virulent that they'll be able to be pandemic to this extent in time to come? I mean, I understand prior also such pandemic would have come in the past as well. But do you really think that now the scientists, researchers needs to be even more vigilant and need to come up with really more technologies in time to come?
Of course, that is what I tried to touch over here, that we should be prepared for the next pandemic, because this time, of course, there were a lot of pandemic preparedness programs by WHO, CDC being organized, but then too, we couldn't actually do as fast as possible, and we could not as fast it was required. We could not give the product as fast it was required. So we should be prepared for the next pandemic. In coming years, you can have many such viruses. So we should, what I have briefed over here, that we should have an established technology and a single-use manufacturing system, so that you are more portable and you are more flexible, so that immediately as soon as such conditions arise, you start manufacturing the product. You develop the vaccine and start going to the manufacturing phase.
Correct. All right. So now just two more questions and then we will conclude the session. So Apurva has a question like, what would be the action of nanoparticle vaccine during increased mutation rate of coronavirus?
So see, when the virus is mutating, I would over here give an example of influenza virus. So influenza virus keeps mutating every year. I mean, it is ongoing. The mutation process of the influenza virus is ongoing. So every year people have to take influenza shots. Why? Because you cannot produce the vaccine against each mutant in the same time. So simultaneously you cannot do that. So once you have a vaccine for one of the strain, it gets mutated. Again, you take that strain, you have an established process, you have an established technology, put that strain into that technology and produce the vaccine against the new strain also. So you will have to keep on producing the vaccine every year. If it mutates, like for influenza, if COVID is changing every year, you will have to give the shots. And even if it is a nanoparticle, the same process will remain same. You will have to have the vaccine against the mutant strain as well.
And in fact, just one very relevant point to this, Dr. Seema, is like, even for this COVID vaccine, the duration, the immunity duration it provides is less than a year. I think it is 8 or 9 months only, right? So probably that also explains that every year, irrespective of what strain mutation would have happened, I think you have to continue taking those shots.
Probably this is going to be like an influenza virus only. That is what we predict. And WHO surveillance takes place for influenza. Every year, the WHO will do the surveillance study and see the epidemiology in the various parts of the world. And accordingly, they decide every year, these are the strains, circulating strains for this northern hemisphere. These are the circulating strains for the southern hemisphere. And accordingly, you have to start manufacturing your vaccines using those strains. So this can also, COVID can also go into the same situation.
No, thank you. I completely agree with you. So let me just once check the chat box, and if there are no further questions, then I would definitely like to thank you and then conclude, but just give me a moment. Let me check if there are any further questions in the chat box. Okay. No. All right, so I don't see any further questions, but to all the participants, I would like to request that in case, because we'll be sharing the presentation, Dr. Seema has already approved that the presentation should be shared with all the participants. And we will also be sharing the recording, and we'll put it on the YouTube also, and we'll share the link in case few of your colleagues could not attend today, or for your future reference. So you can review that, and at any point in time, if you have any questions, further questions, you can write to us at bd_guj. It is bd_guj@lsssdc.in, and we'll try to reach out to Dr. Seema, and then we'll get answers for you. In case it may take a little time, but we will definitely come back to you and try to clarify your questions and queries. So there are no further questions. Then please join me in thanking Dr. Seema Sharma. She is, as you can understand, she is very busy, and still she was kind enough to accept our invitation and to be able to make today's presentation. And it was so informative. I'm sure all the students, participants, everybody has learned a lot from today's lecture. And please join me in thanking Dr. Seema. Dr. Seema, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And in future,
thank you very much.
We'll definitely
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Seema, and thank you all the participants. And so by next week again, we'll come back with our new webinar for the next month with whatever theme. Hopefully, it will be in the quality assurance part. So we'll come up with the detail, and let me just thank you, all of you, once again for your time on a Saturday morning. So thanks, Dr. Seema, and
thank you for patient listening. Okay, my pleasure. Anytime you can call me.
Thank you.